Somebody call.
718844 is me, yes.
Okay, and we have 267-441 as a phone number.
That's Keith Fallon.
Wonderful, good. Just for the record here, we have Charlie Parker, we have Chris Popov, we have Matt Root, we have Matt Rice, Andy Vo, we have Carol with us, and we have Cynthia with us, and we have Michael Reed, Jared Stanton, Keith Fallon, Lori Hunter, Mike Morin, Mike Doan, and Kim, and that's what we've got at the present time.
Also Saul Jabawi.
Saul, thank you very much. I'm sorry.
And Phil Poinelli.
Very good, Phil. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't see on the list that I'm looking at, but there you go, Phil. Oh, yeah, and Saul, thank you. Just popped in. Good. Okay. So I'd like to call the Design Subcommittee meeting to order. I trust that we're being recorded from the Hill side of things. Thank you. Thanks for organizing the meeting. It's March 25, and we have our shared agenda in front of us. We're going to have intro from Keith, and then we're going to move to Matt and open it up for some discussion. And then Keith, Mike, and Saul will be the updated concepts, and then we'll start our evaluation criteria discussion, evaluation criteria consensus, and then evaluation process itself, in hopes that tomorrow we're going to bring some additional wisdom and guidance to the larger committee about where the original 5 concepts should stand now. Does that sound like a plan for today that everybody's in accord with? Hearing no objection, I think I'm going to turn it over to Keith, if I might.
I'm sorry, Court, do you mind if I just add to your comments?
Please.
So my name is Chris Carmody. I work in the town manager's office, and we're hosting the call today. So I would ask that all meeting participants mute their mics unless they are prepared to talk, and then obviously mute them when they're done talking. And then, Court, if you wouldn't mind just doing a roll call vote of committee members at the start, and then for any votes that are taken during the meeting, it'll have to be a roll call vote for each vote. I'm going to turn off my video, but I will be here supporting your meeting during the...
And pop back in anytime we need some management from your side, Chris.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So committee members at present: Court Booth present, Lori Hunter. And Lori is present and muted, I imagine, at the moment. Charlie Parker, the same. We see him among us. And Chris Popov has checked in, as has Matt Root, and Dawn Gorello has emailed us saying that she'll be joining us shortly.
Court, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That committee, if we could, the committee members, if they could announce themselves, just to make sure that they've got the mic connection. Yeah.
All right. So they can unmute themselves and introduce. Am I correct?
I'll unmute everyone. Yep.
Charlie Parker.
Yep.
Lori, go ahead.
Yep, Lori Hunter.
And Chris, go ahead.
Chris Popov.
Thank you. And Matt, go ahead.
Matt Root.
Good. Confirming that Dawn is not among us yet.
I am, Court. I'm here. Dawn Guariello.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Chris, thank you. We are at full strength on our subcommittee side. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Court, if that's open to the design team, in fact, Matt Rice is going to start us off and give us a bit of an overview.
Very good. Thank you. Now, Matt, note that the subcommittee has not seen or heard much since February 13th. There's been a couple of leadership meetings and then a great deal of work on your side. So before we dive into our work, you're going to give us the information and the context we need to know where we are today.
Yeah, thank you for that lead in, Court. Bill, maybe if you can advance to the next slide. That initial overview that we're going to give to everyone is really just a catch up in terms of the initial topics that we've been going over the course of the past probably 2.5 weeks. And they really include a quick update on where we are with the educational program at this point in terms of the program components and the overall building size. We're going to give a brief outline of the pricing options that we're currently considering. And then we're going to move into really the meat of the discussion, which is going to be looking at some updates to the design concepts that we've reviewed previously. So if we advance one slide again, Bill. So the program update piece of this, obviously the space summary document that I think everyone is familiar with on this call is a lot more detailed in terms of the amount of information that's in there. And we can get into that level of detail and look at the space summary itself following this discussion if we want to as part of a question and answer session. But really what we wanted to do here is give everyone a little bit of a high level understanding of where we are right now and the changes that have been made. So I think the last time we spoke with this group, we were up with an overall building gross square footage of around 167,000 square feet, give or take. And really what happened following that discussion is that there was a concerted effort made to really make sure that we're adhering to the overall project budget of $100 million in terms of total project cost. And what that meant is that we really needed to look at ways of reducing the overall size of the building. And so to do that, we actually had a series of very dedicated discussions with both the school leadership and district leadership to make sure that we were looking at reductions in the program that were viable from an educational standpoint. It wasn't a blanket cut everywhere. So what we did is worked line by line through the space summary in order to identify those items where we could make changes. And I'll preface this description with the fact that a lot of these changes were not necessarily easy ones to make. There was a lot of sacrifice that was agreed to as part of the process, but it was sacrifice made with the sentiment of trying to preserve and really preserving the core educational goals that we were striving to achieve with the new middle school. And that really guided all of the decisions as we made them at a much more micro level. So the bullets that you see up on the slide right now are sort of the overview of the changes that were made. So just to run through them, it started with just that confirmation. I think everyone's aware of that we are working towards a 700 student enrollment for grades 6 to 8. And within those 700 student enrollment, we're focusing on a building organization that accommodates 3 complete teams, and the 3 teams per grade, which incorporates ELA, social studies, math, and science, which the labs are part of the on-team collection of spaces. The adjustments that we made within the teams themselves was really just a slight reduction in the size of the classrooms that we were looking at. Because the school is focused on and really committed to limiting the class size to 20 students per classroom, there was a minimal reduction in classroom sizes that we felt was appropriate and still comfortable in terms of providing an overall good educational resource for general education. In terms of special education, there we focused on really looking towards the future in terms of what the middle school and the district is really hoping for in terms of special education, which is a shift towards more push-in services where students are being taught alongside general ed peers within the classroom with the assistance of another adult in really an inclusionary manner. There are still 3 separate programs that were included there. But if for the general special education, if you will, the intent there is to really focus more on push-in. And so some of the spaces that were supplementing and not really core to that push-in model, were spaces that we saw as some option for savings within the overall program. In terms of the specialists that we were looking at, we did make a shift from 8 down to 6 world language classrooms. That was done after a lot of discussion with the realization that the 6 world language classrooms can still fulfill the primary educational curriculum that is currently being taught at Concord Middle School. It's a very robust world language curriculum, and that was still seen as a very valuable asset within the overall school. So we wanted to maintain that, but we think that it is viable within the 6 classrooms versus 8. And then some of the technology and engineering programs, rather than having dedicated spaces, moving forward, the goal is really there to start to integrate a lot of that curriculum into some of the core academic disciplines, such as math, science, but even ELA and social studies. If kids can be coding and programming as part of that coursework, as part of project-based applications, it really amplifies the benefit of that learning, and it makes it more applicable. The art program, in terms of the 3 art classrooms, was not something we touched. That was important just to relay that to everyone. That's still been maintained within the original program, no reductions there. As well as for the music program, we maintained the dedicated band, orchestra, and chorus rooms at their originally designed sizes. The cafeteria or cafetorium, because as you recall in our base space summary, we were not necessarily accounting for the dedicated auditorium space. That will be something that we talk about as part of the pricing options, still something that's being considered. But in terms of the baseline size of the building, we're still looking at a cafetorium, which is a cafeteria with an attached stage. The cafeteria will still be sized in a manner that's appropriate to consider a zoning of the dining areas, so that we don't have just one large, maybe potentially overbearing cafeteria space for some students, but that there will be areas within the cafeteria that will have a more intimate setting, so that really everyone has a comfortable location that they can fit into throughout the building. We also did take a small amount of savings in terms of reducing the size of the scramble servery, though we felt that it was important to keep that resource within the building to make sure that students had a more interactive and enjoyable experience in terms of getting food and hopefully increasing their participation within the school. We feel that the size of it is still viable to achieve those goals in terms of making it a more welcoming space, but we did take a small savings there. The dishwashing, we did preserve that as a function within the kitchen environment, so that we still will have the ability to wash dishes, which helps tie into some larger environmental goals as well. And then lastly, the gymnasium, we are still maintaining the 6,000 square foot gymnasium as sort of the baseline school building size. But it's worth pointing out that we're also still maintaining a single alternative PE space that gets us from the 2 teaching stations within the gymnasium to a 3rd station that's going to be within the alternative PE space. That alternative PE space was reduced slightly in terms of size, but again, still something that we think is viable for the primary goal of instruction in alternative space that's not necessarily as potentially large and overbearing as maybe a gymnasium for some students. So the end result of all of the square footage reductions that were made got us down to a total, again, of 144,005 square feet. This is gross square footage, so full built square footage. And at that size and at our current sort of ballpark cost estimating target, we are below the 100 million total project cost budget in terms of where we are. So again, I'm going to proceed now and just hop through sort of what some of the pricing options that are currently being considered are. We will have the opportunity to circle back into a higher level of detail on any of these particular topics on the program reduction summary or on the pricing options as we go through. So yeah, that's fine, Bill. You can hop in on the pricing options. So the first option that we ran through and that we're currently holding is some options in terms of the gymnasium sizing. And again, the intent here is to provide some variety in terms of what the potential size of the gymnasium is with different amenities that might be included within it. They include, again, as that baseline, the 6,000 square foot gymnasium that holds some amount of seating, but not more than 100. There's a larger option that holds, adds a second court in terms of the cross courts that are there and increases the seating capacity, which would jump the square footage from 6,000 up to 8,600 square feet. And then there's a third option that provides two cross courts that are now competition size and could run for concurrent types of activities with seating on both sides of it. And then a last option that was been discussed but not necessarily shown in sketches to anyone is really the notion of providing two full-sized gymnasium spaces or buildings. So if we just advance through, there's a quick overview of just what the diagrams of those particular gymnasiums are. Again, this is the baseline gymnasium, just so you have a visual to associate with it. One main court for both volleyball and basketball, as well as some seating. The next option was an 8,600 square foot gymnasium, 2 courts. Neither of those are competition on the cross courts with bleachers included. And then the third option, in terms of what we had drawn, 2 main competition courts with seating on either side for viewing of those side court competitive activities. So if we keep going again, the second pricing option that we are going to be holding through the estimating process is going to be the auditorium space. And what we reviewed with the leadership group was a variety of options for what that auditorium may look like, functionality as well as its size. The first option that we were going to consider is a black box theater type environment. So somewhere around 400 seats. The 4,000 square feet is a rough target. That square footage can move up or down depending on sort of how we want the functionality of it to be. But just that a more flexible type environment with a flat floor within it, potentially without a fixed stage. The second option would be an auditorium that would have a capacity for 1 grade level plus staff. And this would be a more formal auditorium space with a slightly sloped floor as opposed to steep tiers. But with the 1 grade level plus staff, we would time out somewhere around 275 seats. And then the third option, similar to option 2, is a formal auditorium space with a stage proscenium, but would accommodate 2 grade levels plus staff, which would time out somewhere around 550 seats. So just for everyone's reference, it's worth noting that we were pulling back from trying to design the auditorium for 700 seats. It was noted the fact that 700 seats really only would fit the total student capacity, would not hold staff at that point. Really the gymnasium is probably better suited as an all-school assembly environment. And so we'll make design considerations when we're looking at the gymnasium to accommodate that potential use case. All right, so if we advance through, we just gave a few overview slides of what some of the auditorium options might look like and feel like. This is an example from a school down in Connecticut that has this black box type theater space, has foldable bleachers like you might find in a gymnasium that can be retracted against the wall and really give you a lot of flexibility in terms of what you could potentially use this space for. If we advance again, you'll see the more traditional auditorium space that I think folks are familiar with, this one over at Alcott. At a small capacity, this is just 245, but this is more or less the feel of the room that we might be talking about for a single grade level. And then last, we have that medium-sized auditorium, still formal space that could potentially hold 2 grade levels at a time. And if we push through, the one last pricing option that we wanted to touch on, Again, there's a lot more detail to dive into on this particular topic. But in terms of sustainability, we will be running through the cost estimate a variety of upgrades to our already very high level of sustainability that's going to be represented in the baseline costs for the project. But we're also going to be looking at some enhanced sustainability and then certifications to different level as part of the cost estimating process. And with that, I think we will proceed into the design portion of the discussion.
I think we might pause for any questions on that first, if we might, Matt.
Sure. Yep. We just want to make sure we try and leave as much time as possible to go through the design options, just because there's a fair amount of material there, and we want to make sure that we give people sufficient time to really digest and review it.
Good. Yeah, I agree. So we'll be judicious with our questions, but I will open it up to the committee. Anything we need to review on that in terms of how we arrived at the information that Matt just presented? I'll pose one question. Lori, if you could briefly go back to the first slide and tell us about the 3 SPED subsections. Could you give us a picture of that and how the sub-separate programs, is that going to take a lot of accommodation to not impair service delivery, or are you and Justin comfortable that you know what that is going to look like?
Yeah, so we've left the 3 substantially separate programs intact. Those are for our neediest kids, so those programs will have the space they need. What we reduced is what we call our workshops. We had, Matt, remind me, we had how many to start with?
So we had 6 to start with.
Right, so we've cut it back because what our vision of special ed is, and I think the work Justin and I did was projecting present to projected and really naming the goals we have, is to look at more inclusion and push-in, making that reduction seem really realistic and frankly smart, because if our goals were to come to fruition, those rooms won't have kids in them the way they often do now. What it does is put us on a pretty tight timeline to make sure we're working with teachers and professional development and, you know, working the way through the progress we need to make. But we left actually feeling comfortable.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Anybody else before the team moves on with us?
I just had a quick question. This is Charlie. What number do you use for cost per square foot?
So maybe Hill can just reinforce my number, but I believe it was $555 a square foot was what we were looking at for construction cost.
Okay.
I believe that's correct.
I think it was mid-6s for total project. 640 something is my recollection.
Like 660.
What was it?
I think it was 660 maybe.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was somewhere in the mid-6s is what I remember. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the 2020 price? I'm sorry, 2022.
Yeah, I believe that's what we were hearing was 2022 reference. Correct me if I'm wrong, anybody. All right, hearing none, let's assume that's what we've got for best numbers at present to work from. Anybody else? And if not, going to turn it back to the design team.
Keith, if you're talking, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
So Matt, are we picking up Keith right now?
Yeah, we are. I think he may be on mute right now.
Okay.
Was working.
There you go.
We're getting you, Keith.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
How about now? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. So we want to resume. I'm hearing an echo. I'm on the phone, but I wonder if there's a way I can.
If you're on the phone, you want to mute your computer, perhaps.
Keith, I don't think the phone audio is picking up. It's only coming through the computer.
Okay. I have hung up my phone and unmuted my computer. Can people hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, much better. Keith, we may have lost you again.
Okay, how's that?
Better
Can
now.
people
We
hear
can
me?
hear you. Yep.
So Keith, we think you're good to go.
Okay, how are we doing now?
Yeah, just fine. Take it
Okay,
away.
I apologize. That was a bit awkward, but
Right, all right.
okay. So we just want to pick up our discussion of the conceptual design alternatives from February 13. We know that several of the items that you asked us to develop was to see if we could translate the primary things we heard from your the visioning sessions into a series of project goals. We'd like to present those in draft form for discussion today. You also asked us if we would present for you a potential matrix of evaluation criteria. So again, we want to present that. We want to do those things up front before we get into a detailed review of the advancement of the options, probably not in too much detail of them because we can go back to them at the end. We're going to work our way through some of the options and then leave some time where we can discuss and compare the options. So again, Bill, you can move forward. We just keep this 21st century vision diagram at the forefront of our discussions. Your team has put this together. It encapsulates a lot of the things that are important to you, and we've translated some of that into the project goals. I don't want to revisit this too much now. Bill, you can advance, but we just want to underscore that we're keeping these things at the forefront of our thinking as we look at possible building organizations and how we would render those. You can go to the project goals. So we've tried to capture the project goals in a series of kind of thematic areas. Again, these are proposed for your consideration, and I guess as a design subcommittee and as a building committee, you'll have to work through them and see if in fact we're capturing correctly what we're hearing from you. They're identified in primary areas of learning, context, history, and environment. We're trying to keep them broad enough so that they capture all of the aspects of the project and yet succinct enough so that they don't run on and on, so that you can look at them as priorities. I'm trying not to read every single word, but maybe just highlight them and trying to address the unique social and emotional needs of the early adolescent. You hear that loud and clear. That includes efficacy of the educational team, fidelity of teaming, joy in learning, pervasive spirit of inclusion, providing opportunities for different kinds of engagement, be it innovate, reflection, repose, integration, and then also a media center at the heart of the school. Relative to context, strong connection to the natural landscape, strong connection to the history of Concord, and a commitment to utilizing resources wisely. That's about sustainability, energy use, comfort of the students, integration with the landscape, all of those things kind of in a comprehensive way relative to the environment. So I would put those forward as the project goals. I don't know, Court or Dawn, if you wanted to have discussion over these now, or we just put these out there and you guys come back to them, or?
I think we should take it up briefly now with a couple of notes. One, these, whatever they are going to be owned by the committee, and this design subcommittee will only render its subcommittee opinion, number one. Number two, I would ask the question, is the media center at heart, physically or symbolically, indeed an agreed upon goal, or is it one of many and not as paramount as this slide would suggest? The answer for me is I don't know. I honestly don't know. And then my final remark is history, I think, is going to be something that we focus on once we're in the building. I'm not sure that it's going to be significant around design or in construction considerations, but I could be wrong. Those are my few comments. Lori, do you want to pick up?
Sure. I think what strikes me most is a lot of the really great vocabulary in the learning descriptions. I'm struggling with the word efficacy a bit. I'd like that to be stronger or more vibrant.
Sorry, which word?
Efficacy supports the efficacy of the educational team. I think we aim for more than efficacy generally. Okay. I think just capturing, I mean, we're in the wordsmithing mode here at this point to an extent. I think the media center part stood out to me too. It clearly was a big piece of the discussions we had with the staff. I think somewhat, and I know Justin's on the call now, so he can weigh in. I don't know if, it depends on how it fits in. I mean, I guess the question is it a goal, or is it on the list of, could we have it be a center of the building physically versus we want it to be integrated into everything we do? So I think I'm agreeing with Court's questions. In terms of history, and I'll just respond to Court, I think we've talked a lot about wanting the building to reflect, and I say a lot, not even sure which groups of people were in the room when we had the conversation at this point, but really whether the building itself can have a direct connection to Concord. So whether that's because of history or something more general, something that makes it feel like it's a building you'd only find in Concord. So I think, to me, that's what that's trying to capture. And then environment, I think I just add, that's all going in the right direction. I, again, wonder if it's a little downplayed for the goals we're trying to set, and just some bigger language that really expands the real high-reaching project we're creating here. But it's a great start, Keith, really great start.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, that is, we knew that this would really be a document that would require lots of engagement and lots of wordsmithing. And in some ways, it's not only wordsmithing, right? The nuance is important in terms of what is elevated and not. So I'm glad to hear you say that you think it's a reasonably good start at getting you there as a group. And so we do think that probably there's a lot of negotiation about this amongst the committee. I mean negotiation in the most favorable way in terms of finding the way to, tweak it just so it captures really what you want to go after. I think it's a very interesting comment about the media center, if it physically at the heart or some other way that it's symbolically at the heart. But we do think that we've created a draft, and it probably needs some comment and editing and feedback from your group.
So,
can I just say a couple of things? I really appreciate you doing this, Keith. I think this is an important step in the process to And I'm going to suggest that as we move forward, every time the design is sort of presented and explained, that we remind the community what these goals are, however we end up as far as words and strength of comment, which I completely agree with Court and Lori's comments. I think there is some strength in the wording that we can improve upon, because some of these things are very valuable to the project. But I really appreciate you doing this. I think this probably stemmed from my initial comment that said, what are we trying to achieve? And I think it's helpful to always preface design with the goals so that the community and the committee and everyone that's participating understands why things are done and why some things are focused on or inherent to what we're doing. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. It was in direct response to the dialogue we had on the 13th, and that's why we thought it was important to start today's conversation with this out in front.
No, I appreciate it. When I saw it in the draft, when I opened it, whenever yesterday or today, I saw it and nodded my head and was like, awesome, let's get this conversation going, because this is very important in my mind for everyone to understand what we're trying to do from a design standpoint. So thank you.
Our pleasure. So the goals were developed in response to Dawn's comments. And we also, relative to some of the feedback that Charlie gave us and led, we also developed a series of a preliminary matrix for evaluation. Again, those are organized into significant areas that impact the project. There's 4 of them. This screen currently shows 3. We'll get to the 4th one in a minute. But again, I do think that we've put forward some of the grading criteria, you might call it, that we've heard from you, and that this might be a way that as a group you begin to evaluate the various options. So the major areas are educational vision, building planning, site planning, and the one that you don't see right now is energy performance. Again, if we go back to and we might recommend, when we were with you on February 13th, there were different discussions about how might you rank these. Is it simply green, yellow, red? Is it something that's more 1 through 5, where you strongly agree, somewhat agree, neutral, somewhat disagree, strongly disagree? So I think that again, we would propose these for your consideration and to think about, in fact, are they important criteria, and might you use these to elevate or try to objectively analyze the various options that we put before you. I will say that relative to things like spatial efficiency and integration with the landscape, we've tried to make your jobs difficult. And by that, I'm trying to say that we're trying to put options forward that satisfy all of these criteria. Some of these things I think are, you have to think, does the proposal offer the opportunity to do that? So for instance, a connection to the history of Concord, joy in learning. Some of those things are embedded in the way that the project is advanced in a very detailed way. We might suggest that almost everything we show you today has the possibility to integrate joy in learning or reflect the history of Concord. So again, some of these you can see they're almost double, the media center as heart of school. If some further discussion and evaluation of the project goals says that that's not the location of the media center is not a driver, maybe it comes off this list. But again, we thought this is an important document. We wanted to put it forward for draft consideration. Again, I don't want to spend a lot of time. We will visit this again at the end of the presentation, land on it. So again, Court, maybe if there's any commentary on this, we could have a brief discussion now and then maybe come back to it at the end.
Okay, so what I'm imagining, and we're still adhering to our hoped-for timetable, I'd propose that we go back to the earlier slide and simply ask the committee members if there's any new comments or new questions, and I want to feel comfortable, we can leave that behind for now. Take a minute doing that. Anybody have any questions, comments to add to what we've talked about in regard to the goal statements that Keith so effectively put together?
Court, this is Matt Root. I mean, I agree with everything that everyone else has said. How do we go about tweaking this language? Should we send some written comments to somebody, and who is that?
A good question. I would propose, thinking out loud here, that you send those to the committee members, and certainly the community is welcome to do it. Send them to me and Lori. Is that acceptable? And then we'll bring them forward to Keith.
Great. Thanks, Court.
Lori, you in?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Good. So that'll be the way forward on that. Thank you. So now, as to the matrix, Keith, we are going to use this as the tool through which, or the lens through which, we look at the design concepts in order to do some narrowing, correct?
Yes.
So I think we need to visit it once to make it our matrix, and then the second time to apply it.
And yes, so when we get to the actual application of it, it has to be supported by certain data in terms of building square foot, site efficiency. We have that data. We didn't want to complicate the initial discussion of this first.
Fine.
We wanted to make sure that it captured the right aspects of the project and identified the right concepts, the things that are important to you that you might look for in one of a series of options, so that...
Okay. And you wisely said you've made it necessarily difficult for us in the best sense of the term, and we appreciate that. Nonetheless, I think if we can take a few minutes and get a real high level of confidence that we understand these the same way, and that we do any amending or refinement, so that we have the tool, and then we give it back to the group to use today. That's what I'd propose.
Okay, so if in that I don't know if you are asking for feedback from your committee members, or if you're asking me to kind of elaborate on the line items that we had within there. Bill, if you could go back, I'll take it.
I think it'll be a bit of both.
Okay.
Try this on, Keith, that we walk through each item and ask you to parse it if we think that's necessary, number one. And number two, ask ourselves, do we know what this means sufficient to use compare, contrast judgments on these four concepts? And if the answer is yes, we know what they mean, and we can use the criterion that we're looking at, then we move on to the next one. And we just get through this list quickly, but with confidence that it's what we're going to use.
And sorry, Court, this is Matt Root again. I just have a quick setup question. The four columns on the right.
Those are for the four concepts we're going to look at, referred to as the double bar, the pods. We're going to get to this, the treetop, and the pinwheel.
Got it. And then what would, I guess, Keith, if you could speak to what kind of ranking? Is it high, medium, or low, thumbs up, thumbs down, some numbering system?
Yeah, so I think it could be, well, actually it could be either. The thumbs up, thumbs down would be quite simple. But to my earlier point, I would think we have attempted to advance all of the options to the point where you might be able to give thumbs up to all of them, right? Maybe not, but so I would think it's probably green, yellow, red, strong, medium, not so strong, some kind of simple thing. I don't think you want to go 0 through 10 or something like that. I think it's either 3 or 5.
Yeah, I'd even, for today's purposes, skip the 5 Likert kind of approach and just go with the 3 that you proposed first. I think that'll get us where we need to go, because we are not going to deliver a formal recommendation tomorrow necessarily. If we get that far, fine, but we're going to at least make very clear our sentiments about the 4 concepts and the filter we use to get there. I'm hearing no objection to that. Can we move through these? On educational vision, I think fidelity to teaming is paramount. Justin and Lori have made that abundantly clear, and this community and every educator has endorsed it. I think that is one of the pillars of this whole thing. And we could leave that alone, would be my sentiment. Other comments? Yes, no, maybe? The next one, exploration of identity. We know the formative phenomena of middle school, for lack of a better way to put it. And can we translate that into design concept comparative analysis? What do we think?
Court, this is one where we as a design team think that almost any organizational diagram, as it is advanced to its fruition, can support these kinds of things. It's not proximity of spaces or other things like that. It's creating differentiation in the spatial quality at different places. So maybe there's some aspect of it, but I think it's also something that, with an eye toward it, you may be able to advance it into several or even all of the options.
I would concur, and as just one member of 6, I wouldn't feel compelled to necessarily use this today to narrow or prioritize, because I'd be comfortable that we'd be attending to this with any of the designs that we put forward. Joy in learning would be another one in that same category. I can imagine designs that would inhibit or handicap the striving for joy in learning, but not in the ones you put forward. So I'm not sure I'd feel compelled to use that one today as a criteria. Others? Because remember, we're trying to decide, is this the tool we're using today, or are we going to simplify it? Because some of these are acceptably inherent in all of the designs already.
I mean, I guess I'm feeling a bit like we definitely narrowing in on the list of things we're hoping for. I have a couple of questions about whether some are weighted more than others as we look, and I think to Keith's point, that's in the next layer of details. So to some extent, to me, this becomes a yes-no kind of list. Does this design support these things? And if any of the designs don't support all of it, then perhaps that's an exclusionary process. I'm a little unsure, and maybe I'm just getting my head on this fresh as we talk, and frankly, I'm really distracted these days, so bear with me. I guess it's feeling more of a yes-no tool than being able to do it on a graded scale with a high-level conceptual design, because I think Keith's right, a lot of this is going to flesh out in the details underneath. To me, I think I could exclude things if this list doesn't fit everything we see, but I'm not sure I could do a lot more than that.
This is Charlie. I think you're exactly correct in your comment. This is really binary. Either it does or it doesn't. But you couldn't differentiate one from another on a scale.
Right.
That's just not doable for something like joy. Either it is or it isn't. And most of these, it's very difficult to apply the word joy to a building. I guess I'm agreeing, with the point that was just made by Lori that, it's either a yes or a no.
Which I think can be productive, because if we look at a conceptual design that doesn't meet all these boxes, then we could confidently eliminate it.
That's right. It makes it a lot easier to do to run through the exercise. That's for sure too.
Yeah.
One thing I would suggest is that you'll see that schemes have different landscape solutions. For instance, whether parking is inboard or outboard on the site. We know that that any of the schemes can accommodate more or less any of the landscape solutions. So when we're looking at a scheme separated from its specific landscape solution shown today, and you'll see what I mean when we get to the landscape solutions.
Okay. All right, so I'm hearing the subcommittee move toward a yes/no consideration. Is there a sentiment to drop any of these out, or simply use our own implicit weighting of these as we use this as our entire tool? Anybody speak to that for us? Because we want to move ahead, but we want to be comfortable with this in order to do so.
Well, that certainly would apply to the first set of boxes. I'm not sure it applies to all of them.
Okay.
For example, if you go to the last set of boxes, there is some differentiation there. For example, well, go to the previous slide. Spatial efficiency. I would assume that some are more efficient than others. That may be one that you could differentiate.
All right.
I don't know. It's these are tough.
They are tough. Well, and our work is not going to be exact, and the larger committee is going to critique our work and protect us from any lack of judgment that we suffer today. I'm going to guess now, given what I'm hearing and not hearing, that we go ahead and turn it back to the design team to have us use these as criteria, and when we hit each one, we'll decide whether a binary or a more of a gradation is possible. Could we do it that way?
Fine with me.
I think that makes sense. I mean, I know whenever we're using a rubric kind of model in our world in education, you don't really know the tool's value until you apply it. So I think there's a lot of sense to start using it. And I think the criteria are super strong, and that's the most important part. The way you apply it sometimes needs a little finessing. So.
All right. So with that, let's move ahead. And I apologize. I don't think I used our time very wisely for the last 8 minutes, but let's move.
Court, you're doing a great job. There are some weighty things here, and there's a lot to cover. So from February 13th, these are the just a summary, a reminder of where we stood relative to the 5 options. Moving forward, we heard that there was significant interest in almost all of the options. We did hear that option 5, intersection, had some maybe inherent difficulties relative to fidelity of teaming. And so we decided that the aspects of 5, there were certain aspects of 5 which were interesting relative to the landscape and the overall organization, but we thought that just to help hone the focus, we would advance options 1, 2, 3, and 4 into this further discussion. We've named each of them, and so what we want to do today is show you how we've advanced each of these options a little bit. We've done that relative to incorporating the program reductions. So all these were headed toward a program that was nominally 168,000 square feet or something. We're now down at 144. Bill, you can go to the next slide, and even to the next one, please. And so just say a couple things that when we showed you everything on February 13th, even though at that time it was not defined as to whether or not there would be an auditorium in the project, we incorporated those within the options that we showed you. So on the left-hand side, the program was nominally 161,000 square feet at that time. We were carrying an auditorium that was at about 700 students. There was a recognition that incorporating or deleting the auditorium was not a simple function of just picking that piece out, that it would require some reconfiguration of that area of the building. So we will say that as we move into the 4 options today, we have assumed that there is not an auditorium in it. And as you consider whether that's designed for 250 or 450 or 700 students, a similar exercise would come back where you would have to integrate that in some way, but we needed to be able to keep the options apples to apples and kind of be able to simplify the process, because even at 4 options, it's pretty significant. So you can see on the left-hand slide here where we were on February 13th, where we are today. We have adjusted the footprint so that it is more closely reconciled to the 144,000 square foot program. The one other thing that I want to say at this point is that the numerical data is about as strong as the design data at this point. And so what I mean to say by that is that we have identified every program space in the diagrams. We have made an allocation of circulation. If you ask us, have we identified every single electrical closet? Do we have every single fan room? Do we have every single toilet? The answer is no, but is our level of confidence that the diagram or the concept can be reconciled to the target? And our answer to that is yes. So as we work through these, we want to show you how it sits on the site, a little bit more about how the building is organized, and then give you some sense of what the 3-dimensional possibilities are. So Bill, you go to the next, please.
So, Keith,
I think,
Keith, do you want to mention some of the key, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just in terms of the organization of this is a kind of a single-story communal wing of the building set on the higher piece of the plateau, connected to a 3-story educational wing. Those wings are organized around the teams. So there's 3 teams per floor, 3 floors of the classroom wing, generating the 9 teams. The gathering spaces in terms of the gymnasium and the cafeteria on the single-story communal bar, and then supported by administration, media, and the off-team classrooms. To the north is nominally up for this discussion, so to the northwest would be where those off-team classrooms are that we refer to as world language and digital literacy and those aspects. So if we can go to the next slide, maybe Michael. Now, Court, I was thinking that we would probably work through a description of each of the 4 options and then talk about them relative to one another. If you thought it was instructive to talk about them each individually, I guess we could do that. So
I think you're right. Let's do the whole part whole.
Yeah.
We take a look at it, then break them down, then put it back together again.
So I would just say to my team is as we work through these, Michael Dohan's going to talk about the site. Saul's going to talk about the kind of three-dimensional potential of each of these. We should probably try to get through each option in about 6 minutes or so that we could leave some time for discussion. So, Michael, you want to talk about the site?
Yeah, sure. First thing first, there's some organizational strategies that are sort of option-wide through all of these, and I think that'll cut down on the amount of time that we have to spend talking about each one. All four of the options assume separate bus and parent drop-off entrances. All the parent and bus van drop-offs are accommodated by 60-degree angle pull-in spaces with 24-foot aisle widths. All the circulation on every option is one way. All the options assume 18 buses and a minimum of 6 van spaces. On each of the options, we tried to accommodate some growth for the amount of van spaces. We were asked to look at that. I think we can accommodate that on each one. We tried to keep the parking counts as close as possible on all the 4 different options so that we wouldn't be weighting one option over another. All the parking counts on the 4 options you're going to see are all between 165 and 180 spaces. And finally, they all incorporate pretty much identical athletic facility programs. 2 soccer fields that are sort of striped for multiple age groups, almost exactly like they are out there right now. MIAA regulation size girls field hockey. Each one of them has at least 3 tennis courts. MIA regulation size girls softball, although you'll see in a few minutes in each of these, we to accommodate the full athletic program, we've had to overlay some sports, groups with others. So girls softball, for instance, we may not be able to put a fence around the outfield. And then an MIAA regulation size boys baseball field. Those are that's all consistent through each one. You can see here in this first option, the double bar option, what we're trying to do, and this is also, you'll see this throughout all the options, is that we're trying to accommodate buses, prioritize buses and the use of buses over parent drop-off. And one way to do that is to put the bus drop-off and van drop-off at the front of the building. So you're incentivizing students to use the buses instead of cars. So you'll see the bus drop-off in the front, van drop-off in the front here. We're trying to create some separation between that relatively large swath of pavement and the building. So we're incorporating green space in between the building and the drop-off. The drop-offs, as you can see, are separate. Everybody comes in, drops, and then exits out at the northernmost curb cut. I think that, in essence, that pretty much covers this option from a site standpoint. You can see the layout of all the different fields and locations. They're relatively similar to what we had shown on February 13th. We've just adjusted some of the sizes of, the soccer pitches, for instance, now that we have additional information.
Great.
Okay.
Hey, Bill, you can go, and Saul would speak to the potential characteristics and quality of these various options.
So, Keith, I noticed that Saul may have dropped off the call shortly after Michael started speaking. I'm not sure if he's joined us again.
I can just go through there. That would be unfortunate, but I can address these until he comes back to us.
Actually, Bill, while we're waiting, can you go back one slide, please, Bill?
Yeah.
I should mention on each of these the parking count and the impervious area count for each of these. So this option 1, the double bar option, accommodates about 175 parking spaces. And we're at about 19% impervious right now. But I think towards the end of the conversation, we'll have towards the end of the presentation, we'll have a conversation about.
Sorry about that. My connection fell off.
Okay.
I'm back. I lost my connection.
Yeah, so you're up. We're talking about option one. We've just finished or ready to move beyond the discussion of the site organization. So Bill, if you could go again to advance it.
So the section of the building is very much similar to where we were last time. The building kind of cascades down and locates the classrooms a little bit lower in the slope, allowing to have this beautiful sort of ravine or sort of usable space in between them with two bridges. If we can go to the floor plan of the next image. Next image, Bill. So we kind of developed the opportunities in here more sort of in relationship to the landscape. So as you enter the building, you essentially have a full view through a lot of the spaces to the gym on the left. Furthermore, to the cafetorium, and that kind of offers a really fantastic view down and into the landscape with a sort of a large amphitheater or sort of stepped seating. But also, as you enter the building, to your right is a small courtyard, again, that brings daylight to the space. And as you proceed into the classroom wing, we opened up that area, allowing you to have this kind of fantastic view to into the landscape. So this whole connectivity between the plateau and the landscape become this really wonderful set of relationships, almost iconic, between the sort of the public space of the building and the more intimate natural spaces. Also, with that opening that connects all floor of the building, we're introducing an open stair. If you can go back to the plan, we're introducing an open stair. Now, the same similar situation is along the other bridge. Also, we widened the bridge so it becomes really a space rather than just a link. You can have seating, you can have multiple sort of functions there, and the whole space began to be a little bit wider, allowing for creating sort of multiple eddies along that corridor that allow choices of spaces. Go to the next one. The classroom configuration is again much more sort of structured and organized than last time, and you can see that sort of the neighborhood for each group sort of gathered around sort of a common team space. The cafetorium is on the lower level, and it has views into the sort of ravine into the landscape, but also we located the music rooms right next to it, so there's a relationship between the music classrooms and the cafetorium. Next image. The upper level, we can spend a couple of minutes here in terms of the organization. As you can see, each classroom and science classrooms are sort of clustered with supporting classrooms and administrative spaces around them. Next image. So here you can begin to see how this sits in the landscape. There's the classroom bar with these kind of open spaces between the teams begin to look outboard, and it's really kind of a wonderful sort of view, while the public spaces of the building face the main street and the public sort of spaces, the parking and the entry. Next image. Bill, next image.
You can see in this image here the cafeteria is a double height volume that has access directly to that courtyard. So easy access to the courtyard, and then the northern bridge is a two-story bridge, and so it almost creates two distinct. Well, not almost. It does create two distinct courtyards that could take on a character of their own.
So you can see here that we sort of cranked the building a little bit so that cafeteria outdoor space is wider and it's a flat space. And we can go to the next image. And these are the two courtyards beyond. I mean, it's actually one continuous space because the second smaller bridge is only on the upper level. So that space can become terraced, and it can become a series of these kind of wonderful either classroom spaces or activity spaces, depending on how to begin to program it. But it's no longer a slope, and it's a cascading series of terraces. And you can imagine sort of like the views into that from both the sort of classroom corridor and from the other spaces. Putting the media center.
Media Center is a very wonderful space that has direct sight both to the smaller interior courtyard and also into this larger space. Beautiful daylit space with a lot of transparency.
Next image. You can go next one, Bill. Bill, can you switch to the next image?
I did. Let me know if you can see.
Okay.
This is the view of the,
this is the view into the of the classroom bar, and you can see it's a 3-story space. But we're beginning to sort of mass or articulate each neighborhood as a volume. And one of the nice things about it is that the scale of the bar is kind of reduced by the vegetation, but the entire bar sits on kind of a sloped surface, so it's almost like a promontory, so that the views are into the treetops. You can go to the next image. This is the view into the longer courtyard. You're seeing the smaller ridge, and you can see sort of the opportunities in terms of these terraces of being these incredible inhabited spaces, and they can be designed either as learning spaces or play spaces or just an imaginative place for children to look into. Next image, Bill. And this is the view into the cafeteria courtyard. The cafeteria is on the right side, and the classroom spaces are on the left side. And it's kind of an interesting point where that whole courtyard opens up into almost like a gully in the landscape that begins to kind of cascade down. And again, that set of relationship can be improved over time as a design progresses.
Okay, so I think that we'll just move through a very similar format for each of the other 3 options. Again, Bill, go to the next slide where we have a comparison of both the reduction of the overall footprint and then also some comparative pieces that might be worth bringing up. So,
Okay, I'll call you after.
So relative to here, you can see again the, let me also say that all of the options that we're going to show you are within a percentage point of the targeted square footage. So we've been squeezing and massaging them, and so we think we get them all very close. This one is called the pods, where we organize the teams both horizontally and the option to do it vertically. They're connected by a daylit connector that has opportunities for multi-story spaces. You can see this kind of main entrance where you have the administrative suite on one side, media center right there as you enter the building, the gym and music rooms to the northeast, the cafeteria, kitchen, and I'm sorry, the art rooms are at the further northeast, that kind of deeper salmon. And then the more orangish color is the music rooms that are immediately adjacent to the performance platform within the cafetorium. This one, as we talked about before, could give you the opportunity to organize teams either vertically or by floor. And then at each point there's a multi-story connection with opportunities for collaborative learning and informal gathering. Go to the next one, Bill. Again, this just label some of the things that we were talking about. You do see the workshop rooms right at the entrance to the hubs or the team rooms. Very kind of I think unique place there. The south side of the building is sculpted a little bit so that you get lots of daylight into the team rooms, the hubs, and then also into all of the classrooms. Now we've cranked the pods just a little bit so that they have a little more north-south orientation, and again it kind of occupies the crest of the site, so that the kind of communal piece of the building is a one-story piece, and then the pods are 3 stories and step down the hillside.
Keith, one thing I would say, we tried to shrink I think the drawback in the scheme is the distances between each team to the next team. We tried to shrink it, but given the configuration of the scheme, it's very difficult. So in this scheme, the teams are slightly separated from each other. So in terms of the class identity, it's a little bit more difficult.
Yes, that's a fair distinction. The other thing, though, is that the off-team classrooms are maybe a little closer to the teams, right?
Yeah.
So
that's
a legitimate distinction.
Oh, you're up.
This is Matt. Lori, do you have a initial response to the benefit or drawback of that?
A very initial response. There's a piece of me drawn to how this feels more connected between the common spaces of the cafeteria and the gym and that whole side of the building to the teams, but I see Saul's point. I'm debating, this looks a lot like the building I was in Duxbury, where there was some distance between the teams, which had its pros and cons, honestly. So how's that for a mixed set of
That's good.
feedback?
What about the value of flexibility of going vertical versus horizontal?
Yeah, I am really debating that. I screenshot the whole set of 5, and I'm like doing this ongoing comparison between the two. I'm anxiously awaiting option 4 to hear some more pros and cons of that, because I think that starts to answer that exact question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Bill, you're the keeper of the mouse, so you have to kind of keep moving us along here. So,
in terms of the this pods option, again, organizationally, programmatically, a lot of similar features to the double bar option. One of the interesting things that we found for this option is there's this diagonal slice of the building entrance. Creates a really interesting, there you go. It creates a really interesting organizational element that we've looked at carrying through the site. And it really creates a really interesting sense of place at the front of the building that we'd love to be able to explore more. Again, though, everything else is basically the same here. Buses and van drop off at the front. Parent drop off separate. There you go. Everybody exits furthest to the north. About 175 parking spaces on this one too, pretty much identical to option 1. About 18% impervious area right now. I think that's a fair assessment for the site. We can move on.
Sorry, Mike. This is Matt again. I'm slow here. Can you tease out what's the interesting aspect of this one compared to the previous option?
Oh, sure. So there's a sort of diagonal slice through the building at the main entrance. I don't know if you can see the cursor on the screen there that Bill's pointing to it right now. You see that really small cursor?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so No, I found that to be an interesting site organizational element, and it's a really interesting way to pull the site right into the building and pull that really large. See where the number 7s are out on the site. This really sort of beautiful, great, almost acre and a half open space that we're trying to create in front of the building. A really nice way to try to draw you from that space and from Marlborough Road, in fact, right into the main entrance of the building. So I think that creates some really interesting design opportunities for the site at the front of this building.
Great, thanks, Mike.
Nope.
It has a dedicated service entry, right, which is a differentiator for slightly different,
yes.
right? So
Yeah, that's it. A couple of these where the service entrance is on the west side. There you go. Thank you, Bill. You'll see that we are able to accommodate a separate curb cut for access for the trucks at the loading dock. You'll see that most of them are skewed at an angle to the street. That's on purpose. That it allows us to be able to dress the front of that the front of the loading dock with landscape and berms and such to be able to block the view of the loading dock area from the road while still being able to give access.
Bill, next one. So the interesting thing about the scheme is that the primary space of the scheme is the long corridor that connects the different teams, and in each one along each team there's a connective space. So in terms of choices, in terms of spaces, the scheme gives a little bit less than other schemes. You really are always on or slightly off of that corridor. So there's sort of there's kind of pressure at corridor at all levels, right? However, this also is what gives you a sense of compactness. The building doesn't sort of nestle in the landscape. It kind of sits on and sort of the landscape around it. You can see here the music classes are on the right side, again near and the media center is in the center in the purple, some admin in the center. The classrooms are these pods, and we skewed them as a little bit in order to create a better solar orientation. Still not great, but better than before.
So just a minor point of clarification is at the left-hand side, those are the music rooms that can support the cafetorium, and the art rooms are on the right-hand side.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
No problem.
Next. So at the lower level, that corridor becomes a corridor, or truly a corridor in a sense, and then to mediate that. We kind of created these niches where you can have some public seating in there, but along that upper wall, essentially there's no daylight because you're kind of buried into the ground.
Okay. That's interesting.
The third level, the corridor becomes glazed because it looks into the sort of northern orientation. And again, you have these spaces that connect up and down the different pods, right? So you have that vertical connectivity, and those spaces and their relationship to the team room is really what makes the scheme interesting. You can see here it's a much more of a sort of a solid building. Next.
Oh, I see.
And you're looking into the classroom.
Against the cafeteria and gymnasium, that corridor almost becomes bridge-like, and you have connectivity between the lower level and the primary level, and then the opportunity for daylight coming in at that point as well.
Okay. And next scheme. Next scheme, Bill. So you can see here that these classroom pods actually create these fingers into the landscape. And again, in between them, there are these terraces that can be occupied for any purpose, whether it's play area, whether it's classrooms, and the terraces overlook the sort of the slope and the vegetation. Next image, Bill.
Saul, I think you have a bit of a delay.
Yeah.
This is kind of a close-up of the terraces and the class pods. Next image. And this is the front, the public space, and it almost becomes a street-like sort of a view with the different heights of the different functions that could be articulated as a level of interest. But it still is a pretty continuous long surface. You can see the auditorium here. Next image, Bill.
Gymnasium there. So,
sorry, the gymnasium. Sorry about that. Next image.
So option 3. Oh, sorry. I thought that.
And this is another view into the terraces.
Mm-hmm.
There's got to be some great light getting to classrooms through those, I would think.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Option 3 is a linear arrangement that we called treetop teams. If you compare the footprint, one of the things that we actually learned some things from the pinwheel relative to the configuration of the teams, the classrooms, and being able to integrate some off-team classrooms more closely and maybe almost have a completely, integrated team there. So you can see toward the right-hand side of the right diagram, we've adjusted that just a little bit. We worked on the organization of the more public component, which is on the left-hand side of the diagram. And if you remember, again, that piece sits on the upper plateau. There's a bridge connector that then connects to the team classrooms. We've worked on making that a lively place that has the opportunity to support collaborative learning and small group gathering spaces. And then that connection is on the main level, which becomes the second level of the classroom bar, and the landscape slides under that bridge to make some very interesting dynamics. At the middle of that educational bar, you see we've introduced a few opportunities for daylighting and kind of also reinforce the geometry and configuration of the teams.
Keith, is the purple the library?
Yes, it is. Immediately.
The purple
across
is the library. Yeah.
Yeah.
The light blue is a cafeteria. The darker blue is our gymnasium.
Okay.
Correct. And the kind of salmon color next to the library are the art rooms, and then next to the administrative suite is the digital learning and those kind of science and technology rooms. But the off-team classrooms, which would be language arts and those other things, they're the kind of the grayer, more olive color, which are immediately proximate to the typical team.
Yeah.
So in the treetop site, the way the building sits on the site lends itself to an organization where the bus access comes in across the face of the building, then does sort of a hairpin turn. I don't know, Bill, if you can pull up your pointer to try to explain this. Yeah, it comes around. And then when it gets to the intersection by where the corner of the soccer fields is, the buses would take a right turn to exit again the site from furthest to the north. The parent drop, there you go. And the parent drop off would come down in through that middle one and then take that left, that's right. And then along there where you see the number 4, that's where the parent drop off spaces are, and then they would leave the same way. This one also affords us the opportunity for a separate loading dock entrance as well. All the other organizing elements are the same. This one accommodates about 165 parking spaces, and we're at about 17% impervious on this one as well.
This illustrates Paul's earlier comment where you can see that if the parking is adjacent to Old Marlborough Road, now all of the athletic, recreational, and kind of outdoor learning spaces are all interconnected adjacent to the more heavily wooded sloping portions of the site, and they're not separated by that parking. This is a possibility in each of the options.
That's correct.
So one of the one of the issues that we will look at is if the parking is inboard, that is into the site, it does begin to divide all the spaces, but it also becomes an issue of safety a little bit, and an issue of increased paving. The disadvantage of it is that when people are driving by, they're going to see parking rather than a landscape. But I think that the experience on the campus itself is much improved if there's a connectivity between the landscape element and the natural landscape rather than having a parking separating them. So, I think that's a sort of a pros and cons that we have to look at.
It's important to note, like Saul said, that I feel like we can accommodate the parking either along Marlborough Road or on the inner part of the campus on any of these 4 options.
All right. Next image, Bill. So the heart of this project really becomes this bridge, and we kind of widened it and created sort of eddy spaces sort of tucked in order for there's some seating and possibly accommodate some functions. But in this, we connected it right away with the entryway. So when you come in, that space is really right at the heart and center of it. And it'll be pretty spectacular in terms of actually looking both ways and seeing sort of the landscape. And it creates kind of fantastic building entrance. To the left of that is another interior courtyard that begins to introduce vegetation. So that whole experience feels very connected to the landscape. And you can see the sort of, by shortening the classroom wing, we're allowing for less circulation between the different classrooms and the teams and the classrooms. The media center really immediately at the center of it, but also has spectacular views, and so is the cafeteria. And the advantage of this cafeteria is it's really kind of conveniently located next to the service and the kitchen, and it overlooks the landscape, but at the same time, it's a little bit farther away from the classrooms, from the teams. Next image. This is the lower pod of the classrooms and the upper level of the classrooms. Next image. You can see here the sort of the elevation, section elevation, and you can see how that bridge begins to create this kind of really interesting connection where the landscape really slips into under it. Next image. Again, the classrooms are really tucked into the trees, so that's what we call the treetops. And the upper part of the public part of the building is beginning to mediate between the plateau and the sloped landscape. And you can see sort of the gully moving through the building and beginning to create this really, really fantastic feature. However, what's interesting about this scheme is there are less terraces and outdoor public spaces for sort of learning classrooms and other functions. closer look at it. Next image. And here you can see the sort of, again, the public face of the building in relationship of the masses. This would be the entryway. And what's nice about this is that unlike, let's say, scheme number, I think, 2, it has a very sort of limited facade in the sense that the public face of the building doesn't stretch forever. The bridge and the classrooms are kind of tucked in. So the building itself, by using the sort of the slope, begins to be smaller and in a more appropriate scale for the sort of site. And you can see here the landscape is slipping through and the public bridge, the sort of the multifunction bridge. Next image. This is sort of, again, kind of the entryway is to your right and its connection to the bridge. So you can imagine what a fantastic experience that could be. Mm-hmm. And the classrooms are further remote.
So, and then finally, option 4 is the pinwheel. We're trying to work our way through these options fairly quickly, but still give them their due time. Bill, if you can go to the comparison, you can see we've maybe been most aggressive in our adjustments to this scheme. Because we were so cognizant of the amount of ground area that it covered with the 3 distinct pods, we have taken what was formerly the east pod and put it on top of the west pod. So that is now a 2-story connector. It lightens the footprint on the grade. The southern lower pod is 1 story down. Again, that steps into the landscape. One of the things that this does is creates a great opportunity to have an inhabited roof deck on top of the southern pod, because that is now at the same elevation as the primary gathering spaces. Again, the building organization in terms of the kind of driving concepts that you see within all of the options is that the gymnasium, the media center, the cafetorium, those are all immediately adjacent to the public entrance and easily accessible by that. And then strong visual connections to the educational wings, but yet they are kind of clearly defined and easily accessible. This creates some opportunity to slope down the hillside like the others did. There is a small lower level that includes the art rooms. We can move to the next one. Again, you can see where it sits on the site. A lot of the same principles we've been discussing thus far. Great courtyard opportunities within this option as well.
Yeah, in terms of site organization for this option, the circulation, the vehicular circulation organization sort of lends itself to wrap around an internal area of where the vast majority of the athletic program would be. On this option, the bus entrance and the parent entrance are parallel to each other, but still separate. They both wrap around, and it's still, again, a one-way circulation pattern where you exit furthest to the north. This one also allows us to accommodate a separate loading dock entrance for trucks that we can buffer through the landscape. All the other organizing elements, all the program elements here are similar to the other options.
Next one. So what this scheme does, which the others don't do as well, it begins to cluster things. So for instance, the middle triangle right in the sort of public areas can become almost like a town square, where from one location you can see the media center, the gym, and the cafeteria, which is really incredible. It's like becomes that could have skylights, and it could be absolutely wonderful. And then within a very short distance, you can get to the sort of heart of the of each class. The scheme essentially eliminates what we would call the longer corridors and the schemes by creating these series of clusters. And the experience could be really wonderful. Imagine coming in, entering, and being in this middle of this town square. So there's a sense of centrality. But as soon as you begin to walk into the bridge, you see these kind of cascading courtyards in between the main the public building and the classroom and the team wings. And again, we wanted to make the bridges a little bit more than just a bridge. We wanted to make them a place, so we widened them. This is a lower level, and again, so when you come in, you can immediately descend to the lower level, and the art classes are on the lower level because then they can have an art porch where they can do outdoors work. The classrooms are the teams are very close to each other, but enjoy a sort of their own team space. If you can go back to the image, Bill, for a second. One of the nice things about this is the ability, for instance, if you're coming in from the outdoors and then you turn to the left to see into the lower wing, you can see right through that space into the into the roof garden there. And that could be really, really fantastic. Next image. You can skip that one. That's the upper level of the two-story wing of the classrooms. And you can go to the image, next image. And you can see here the sort of relationships between the entry and the roof garden. The idea of kind of coming in and walking that roof garden, overlooking that landscape. And again, that could be classroom areas, could be play areas. It could be many things. Next image. And in here you can see sort of the lower wing is the roof garden, so you kind of barely see it. And you can see the clustering of the public spaces versus the two classrooms that kind of look into the landscape. And here you can see sort of like the sort of interest, or sort of, I would say, wonderful quality of the spaces in between the classroom buildings and the public spaces. So the cafeteria has its own courtyard on the upper left. The media center has its own views and its own courtyard, its own terrace. And as you kind of cascade down, you have multiple terraces that begin to sort of be used for any purpose that we would develop later on. And you can hear again the roof garden, which really is not developed at all. We just put trees in there to indicate that it is a roof garden. Next image. I mean, the variety of spatial experiences here is pretty immense. Here you can see, essentially you're seeing the entrance and the sort of what's called the town square as the lower space, and that could be completely skylit if we wanted to. And one of the nice things about the public face of this building, that it begins to create an L shape, so it's a little bit more welcoming. It's a bit of a hug in terms of the entryway. You can see here the lower level. Go back. I'm sorry, go to the next image.
Sorry for that.
No, the other way, the art porch.
Yeah, you can go to the art. Previous image, Bill.
No, two ahead. There you go.
Yeah, here we go. So you can see here the relationship between the art classes and what we would call the art porch. It's really a nice space. It's sheltered, but it also opens to the landscape. but you also here you can see further down the bridge to the lower classroom group. And I think we skipped one image, right?
No, we've hit them all.
All right, perfect.
Yeah. So then we have a couple then side-by-side comparisons. I know that it's really a lot of material to cover, but and then we've done that even eliminating one of the previous 5 options. But so we think that each of these have different weighting criteria. Maybe not so quickly through those just yet, Bill. But in terms, if we go back to the hang right here. So, and then, to the views within the landscape, the dimensional models within the landscape. They contain these evaluating criteria that we talked about in terms of fidelity of team, proximity to off-team classrooms, opportunity for engagement of outdoor learning, some of those things. So we hope that maybe that evaluation criteria that we put in there, you can see how you might look at these various options through that lens. Bill, if you would just go to the populated evaluation matrix for a second. We will say that now you can see here, so we have populated these. As I mentioned at the beginning, all of the gross square footage of each of the options, we've really been working to get them reasonably close. We're within a percentage point up or down. You can see that the extent of the footprint on for each option, that does vary a little bit, going from 80 to 111,000 square feet. You can see how relatively smaller the footprint is for option 2. You can see that option 4 is a little more aggressive. The analysis of the site pieces came in a little bit late. We are working all of them, Michael, to nominally 175 or 180 spots. I do think that the site coverage ranges a little bit, maybe from 17 to 19% or something like that, which is slightly above what's allowed by the township or the town at 15%. We did think maybe there's an opportunity to use some pervious paving within the parking stalls, not the drives, to maybe help get that down. This preliminary site coverage data is incorporated on each of the individual slides. Coming out of this, we could update this matrix very simply, but we thought that this was an important aspect. I will also say that the last piece of quantitative data that we would look to gather would be a calculation of the exterior facades. We're just working to get there. We could generate that because that would have an impact on the cost. I think, Court, I'm ready to hand it back to you in terms of how we might want to work through a comparative slide. I will say that one thing that we did do is we added to the back of this slide deck the series of precedent images that were given to us as part of the visioning, because we thought that communicated a level of quality and expectation that this might be important to the cost estimators, so that they have some understanding of what the expectation might be for the interior fit out, the quality of light, the kind of character of the spaces, just as they compare that with the quantitative data, the relative massing of the buildings, and these kind of things that communicate expectations for level of quality.
Thank you. That's a lot of material. I think the first thing we need to do is a time check. It's 5 of 3, and I wonder if the 6 members of the committee want to extend another 25 minutes or so, but that was not the original expectation. We've learned a lot. We can carry it forward individually and see what comes out that sounds collective tomorrow morning, or we can hang in there for a few more minutes today. If I could do a quick check in with people. Lori, you've got the most on your plate with concern for kids and families right now. What's your time look like?
I'm 10 minutes late to another meeting already.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. So given that, you wouldn't say that if it wasn't a meeting that had equal or a greater priority.
Correct.
Well,
I don't know that you couldn't continue to deliberate, though, on some of the pieces we've talked on and continue without me. Jared, you're still on, right?
I am still on.
So Jared's here and can loop back in. I might be able to pop into the other session.
Very
and
good.
come back.
Okay, Dawn?
Sorry, I had to unmute. I'll be honest, I could do it, but I've literally been in meetings since 10 a.m. and my kids are literally having meltdowns. So it's like the 2 o'clock meltdown time that's been consistent for the last 2 weeks. So, if we can be concise, I can probably do 10 or 15, but that's, I gotta.
Then I'm going to propose that we do 10 or 15 and only hear of essential questions we have on this for analysis that we're going to do independently and come together at a later date, beginning tomorrow morning and inside the larger meeting.
Court, are you okay if I hop off and Jared will wrap me up with that?
Thank you. Yes, please.
Thank you so much. Wow, I'm overwhelmed with the amazing work going on here. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Court, this is Charlie. I don't know whether you can hear me or not, but I keep getting bumped off the screen. Can you hear me?
I can. Yes, I can.
So I would also ask that if we could get a PDF of these slides, that would be great, because I can't see them.
I think they were.
My screen went dead.
Weren't they sent through yesterday, Court?
Not this version, no.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. It didn't have quite all of them. Yeah, good point, Charlie.
So this one's dated tomorrow, March 26th, if I'm correct. So we'll put that to Bill and team to get those off to at least me so I can forward them.
Matt, can you speak? Did we send that through?
Yeah, we'll send it over to Hill, and then Hill will distribute it out to everybody concurrently.
Perfect. Thank you, Matt. All right. So I want to stick with this slide in lieu of any others. I think it suffices for now. And let's take another 10 if we've still got Charlie, Chris, Matt as and Dawn for a bit, maybe as a quorum, and simply finish this up by way of seeing that we either have major fundamental questions answered or at least put on the table for the design team folks. And so let me return, I'll take one for starters, Keith, and say, you say that you are still working the numbers for what this means in terms of, I forget your term, but basically perimeter and structural considerations that are going to factor into cost, correct?
The perimeter area, and we should be able to generate those fairly quickly.
Because we all know that cost is a primary driver right now, and it's going to be an even bigger driver tomorrow morning in the large committee. So everything we do today is with that piece of information and the implications not fully known at this time, and that's fine, but let's note it and move on. High-level questions, folks. Who wants to take it?
Or do we have a sense that all four of these have comparable energy efficiency goals to the extent we know anything right now?
So we don't have all of our sustainability people in the room, but we've certainly got a lot of talent with us. Can you speak to that, folks?
Well, it would have, I don't know whether I'm the one that ought to say something about this, but, this is Charlie. The pinwheel sticks out to me as the point off the curve of these designs. It's different than the others. it's less compact. It's more spread out and distributed. It seems to have more wall space. And my initial thought is that it's going to be more difficult to fit out with equipment, number one, and number two, it's going to be a little bit more expensive to heat, and three, probably going to be more expensive to build. That's just a reaction I had on that the pinwheel kind of jumps out as something that's quite different than the other three, for what it's worth.
Can others weigh in on that hypothesis?
I was just this is Dawn, and I'm certainly not the sustainability expert in the room, but my 2 cents on that, picking up on what Charlie said, the pinwheel is going to have one more footprint, which I would agree is definitely going to be more expensive. It has more wall area, I would believe. And it also has east-west facing classrooms, which I'm going to argue is not ideal and hard to support from a sustainability net zero perspective. So that's my 2 cents.
So, the more complex you get in shape, harder it is to get good numbers from a sustainability point of view. That doesn't mean there are other trade-offs that wouldn't make that worth it, but it just becomes much, much harder, to build properly and to sustain.
Matt, Chris, and design team, A or nay, or other information vis-a-vis number 4 and cost/sustainability?
I can't add anything to Charlie and Dawn's comment. That was my inclination as well.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, I'm not sure about that, because number 4, actually, if you look at it in terms of surface area, probably doesn't have as much as, let's say, number 3. It's probably similar in terms of numbers, but it does have more daylight. And you're correct on the orientation. East-west orientation is not particularly great, but it can be mitigated with solar protection.
My 2 cents on that is, why sacrifice the great natural light for what we're trying to do if we can accomplish it in another design option, I guess. That's my thought on that.
Well,
I don't know. From where I sit and when I design buildings, I do not give up on building orientation. You cannot go back and change how a building's placed on a site. So that is one of my number 1 top goals when planning a new building, is putting it doesn't always look awesome on a site plan, but I always try to get classrooms north or south facing.
Yeah, unfortunately, the pinwheel by its nature would create at least one part of the building with a not great orientation.
It has been rotated on the site a bit to improve orientation, so they're essentially arrayed around the sun path.
Okay.
Comparing it to true north in the site plans here.
But we have 2 stories of it facing east-west, right? That's the 2-story wing.
Correct.
Yeah. So you have 2/3 of your classrooms with not ideal natural daylight. Just my 2 cents on that one. And I know it was favored by others for other reasons, but if we're trying to have one of the most sustainable buildings that we can have, my feedback on this particular option is it's not ideal from an orientation standpoint.
Other comments, questions on pinwheel number 4? Let's move to the others. Questions, comments, sentiments?
Well, I'd like to get some comments from Keith and others about the relative advantages of option 2 over option 1. Option 2, reorients creates these, I don't know whether you're calling them pods or, are you calling them pods?
Pods, but basically the team clusters. In every case, you're getting team clusters, with option 2 being called the pod design.
Now, what is it doing for us in terms of from in your sense, it's more complex, clearly. And it's interesting to get those extensions out into the natural areas. But I guess I wonder whether we're getting any advantages over the tighter design that we have in option 1 with option 2. Are we trading something off in efficiency and not getting as much back in value as we might?
I think that relative to square footage, they're nominally the same, and we've worked quite diligently to try to reconcile that overall square footage. I will say that one of the reasons that option 2, at least from our perspective and the feedback that we heard on February 13th, that it continued was because it was the one option that didn't have the bridge connections, and we thought that it was just a valuable exercise to say what happens if we explore one that has more, let's call it more conventional connectivity between the common spaces and the classroom spaces. I do think that move, right, has certain implications. You can see how narrow the classroom element is within option 1, which has great through lighting and those aspects. I would also say that it creates a quite different kind of outdoor spaces, right? It's almost like it captures two unique, they're not even courtyards really, they're like inlets maybe, and I'm looking to Saul to kind of help me to discuss this a bit, but I think the quality and character of the outdoor spaces that each of them generates is a little bit different, and also their connectivity to the major circulation network is also slightly different. I would say that I think that we've worked hard to make sure that that long connective tissue has some spatial complexity to it and makes you feel like you're connected to the upper and lower levels.
So, I think that it's kind of hard. Somebody mentioned the idea of joy. It's hard to kind of explain that in a building, but the separation of the two wings allows you to have significantly more public space that is experiencing views to the outdoors. The lines are much clearer, and the connectivity between the sort of the classrooms, the teams, is much stronger in scheme number 1. Scheme number 2 also struggles in terms of solar orientation. We tried our best to kind of change the solar orientation of the pods, but it's not as successful as in the other scheme.
Well, scheme number 1, option number 1, gives you exposure on both sides, which I found quite exciting. From a design point of view, I thought that, and I also liked at the same time, I liked its compactness. I'm not putting in a vote for option 1 over the others. I'm just saying you have compactness and you have openness side of the building, and I think that spatially gives people a good feeling.
Yep. Charlie, is option 1 the one that presents the most significant building to the public out front?
I don't know. Possibly it does. I can't see it.
Option 1 and
I think it's quite compact, quite frankly. I think it's quite compact, but it doesn't run a big L into the woods, so to speak. It doesn't do that. So,
Bill, could you just go to image 78? We just look at the side-by-side site plans the other way.
The other point about option 1 is it's got a good entrance. It's got a good access point, and it makes sense functionally in terms of its presentation to the side, so to speak. I thought that was another kind of benefit of it.
If I could for just a moment, for option 2, the pods option, from an exterior landscape perspective at the south side of the building, option 2 is the only one where those exterior spaces really embrace the hillside and the natural landscape. You know, option one has a lot of obviously natural light for the building, and we're creating this really neat ravine in between the two buildings. Option, you know, the treetop option has sort of similar things, but option two, those spaces in between the classroom wings, that's the only one that really extends the sort of man-made landscape around the building directly out. You have a direct connection into the hill and the natural landscape. That's one of the from an exterior. That's one of the really interesting parts of that.
Yeah, but I think we can also develop that, frankly, for option one.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, we can create kind of a terrace landscape along there as much. I mean, if we do that for option one, you'll have three different kind of experiences. You'll have an urban experience when you drop off, sort of an in-between, sort of a more tucked in, beautiful, kind of almost river-like landscape with the bridges. And then you can have a cascading landscape in the back from the classrooms. Yeah. So in a way, we just didn't illustrate that, but we could do both.
And in option one of the nice things about the south side of option one is that if we're careful with the grading and how we expose the foundation on the back side of that building, we can really hold the existing tree infrastructure really, really close to that building. So when you're in those classrooms that are facing south, if we're really careful with the grading, you're going to feel like you can reach out the window and almost touch the branches of some of these trees, I think.
And which option is that? Option two?
Option one.
Option one, okay.
The south, that whole long south linear face of that building, we can manipulate the grades and maybe the building foundation in such a way that, like I said, we can hold the trees, the existing canopy, really, really close to that building if we're careful.
Do you think there's much difference in cost between option one and option two, given the fact that you're structuring it differently with the
option one might have a little bit more surface area, but I'm not so sure. We have to confirm that. Mm-hmm. I would say that the option one has more surface area, but the surfaces have the perfect solar orientation, while option two might have just slightly less surface area, but the classrooms don't have a very good solar orientation. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing we can do about that given the configuration of the site and the building. We tried to mitigate it by making them diagonal, but not so much. Also, option two, in order to mitigate the long corridor, we've had to create a multiple sort of punctures in it that have implications in terms of cost and square footage, in terms of cost and usable area.
Okay.
I don't want to dominate the discussion. I want other people to get their chance to chat. But, you know, on this shared wall business, I think you've got a little bit more shared wall space in option number one.
Yeah, Bill, please go to the plan comparison, please. 76, and show it full screen. Yeah. There you go. I'm sorry, Charlie, could you repeat that point again?
Well, it seemed that, well, it's hard to say. It seemed that there was more wall space, shared wall space in option one than in option two, but I may be wrong on that point.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I'll be interested to see what the enclosure surface areas are. It seems like option two should be the lowest. And by how much is the question. Sorry, this is Matt. Don, before you leave, I'm curious your thoughts on option three and that one classroom at the furthest out there is facing, north, whereas kind of option one and option two have all the classrooms more having equal visibility. Do you have an opinion on if that makes a difference?
We may have lost her. Let me check.
Okay.
Let's stick with option. Go ahead.
Dawn, the question from Matt is, option number 3, we've got that one pod that's north facing.
Yeah. Those will be great classrooms. They'll have nice, natural, consistent light throughout the day. There really shouldn't be, as long as they're the same size and equity from a, program standpoint, those will be great spaces.
So the fact that 2 are south facing, 1 is north facing, not an issue.
In my mind, they're not. The south, there will need to be in any of these schemes some sort of direct sunlight / glare mitigation, however you want to, solve that. But that's what the beauty of Southern Light is. You can study the angles at which the sun is throughout the year and the time of day and mitigate it from a solar shading and or light shelf standpoint. So they may need to draw their blinds more on the south side depending on time of year, but on the north, they will have pretty consistent light always.
Got it. Okay.
So I just want to say that we agree with that. And then I would just add the kind of olive, green, gray spaces. Those are also classrooms. They're considered the off-team classrooms. So that's things like world language. And you can see that they're also north-facing in option 3. And there's a series of them that are north-facing in option 1, north of the westerly courtyard.
Good. Okay. Other comments, questions?
This is the design that had long run front of the building back. Discussion point.
The long
Last
run
time
of the
around.
building, if I'm correct, was more numbers 1 and 2 than 3 and 4. There's 1 and 2 have more of a presentation to the street. Am I accurate?
Yeah, Bill, go back to the site plan comparison, please. Yeah, I think option 1 and option 2, they show, even to the site plan. Yeah, there you go. You could argue that they show more of their front face to Marlborough Road.
I was saying equidistant from the team rooms to the front cluster. You get more. It's more equidistant and easy to access in option 1 and 2 than in option 3. Option 3, you have it gated, and you've got a big run for anybody that comes in the front of that building to go to the back, the rear, get to the team, the third team pod, if you will. Maybe that's not an issue.
I was going to say that could be seen as good or bad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it could be seen as good or bad. Similarly with the cafeteria and some other spaces. Let me propose the following, and I'll entertain any proposal. We can do no more deliberation unless we're together today or tomorrow morning. Might a way forward be the following, that we propose to Tim and Dawn, hi Dawn, that tomorrow morning each of us be permitted 3 minutes to give our pros, cons, questions, 1, 2, 3, about each of the 4 options as a way to help set the table for tomorrow's agenda. Would that be workable? Would that be helpful, Dawn?
Yeah, I think so. And honestly, I think if we can, as concise as we can be, I could probably summarize my thoughts in a minute or a minute and a half. Just I have strong feelings about why I prefer the couple that I do. So I think 3 should be the maximum and try and keep it concise. There's 6? How many of us are there? 6?
Let's make it a 2-minute goal. And
yeah.
Okay. We'll do our homework independently as using this meeting today and the slides that are going to follow as soon as Matt can get them to Hill and Hill can get them our way. And then we'll come in and fit into your agenda tomorrow with that kind of approach. Charlie and Chris and Matt, are you in accord?
That sounds good to me, Court. I'm also wonder if there's value in a straw vote or quick maybe we don't even have to publicly do it, but just send an email to, or maybe we have to publicly do it, but just sending an email of top 2 choices to either you or Dawn?
We would have to do that publicly, I think. Otherwise, it's going to be considered serial deliberation.
Okay.
And I think we could argue do it right now as a straw, but we could also argue don't do it to see that we all get a few more minutes without the additional influence of each other. So I'm happy either way, but I'm happy to go it alone and see what it reveals tomorrow. Sentiments?
Well, we could do a straw vote, and if we had unanimity, that would be, we could say, well, that's maybe a good thing and got some validity. If we don't, then maybe we open it up and continue to process it.
Chris, sentiments? Dawn, sentiments? Straw poll? Straw poll before we wrap.
My only fear, I don't know if Jared is in the know on what Lori thinks. Is that
I am not, so I'm just listening.
Okay.
Let's hold off without Lori's presence.
I fear Lori's voice should be heard, so.
Yep.
So we all come in as equals tomorrow with
Yeah.
our max of 2 minutes.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll convey that to Tim, who
Okay.
I don't believe is on this call. I was just looking for tomorrow's agenda.
I'm sure it gives us the latitude to do that. It'll constitute our report, basically.
Yep, okay.
Okay.
Yep, that works for me.
Other questions and comments from the design subcommittee before we adjourn?
I just have one clarification, Court. We're trying to get down to 3 for pricing, right? So essentially,
3 at most.
summarizing what everyone's top 2s are, then in theory, the top 3 would make the cut and the 4th would fall off. Is that the idea?
That's accurate.
Okay, just checking. All right, very good.
You want us to vote just which 3 we want to retain, not which order to put them in.
Correct. Yeah, they'll all get priced equally, like without.
So yeah, I don't think we want to prioritize them at this point.
Well, and to your point, Charlie, we still have more information coming in.
Right.
Oh, good. Matt, other notes before we wind up?
No, just my one question would be about pricing. I mean, how does pricing fit into the decision? Are these all close enough that pricing isn't a determining criteria at this point? Or, I mean, it seems like some of them might have a significant cost premium over others.
I think it's a criteria, and it'll be more so when it hits the larger committee.
Court, this is Mark Warren from Hill International. This might be a decent time to interject this comment. Just a couple of things. Number one, the decision to go from the 5 options down to 4 and then eventually 3. I think it's important that we just clarify that the committee is comfortable with that, with the presented material before you. Obviously, I think with valid reasoning, we went from 5 down to 4. I just want to make sure we're having the consultants on the phone here that you've been provided a comfortable amount of information to be in agreement with that decision. And then number 2, Hill would recommend that all 4 or 5 options be considered for the pricing estimate. We would, for feasibility, we don't envision this being an excessive request. We'll have estimating services, hopefully, to compare. We don't feel this is, like I said, excessive. So I guess our recommendation would be to consider the 4 or 5, and if not, just make sure that you are indeed comfortable with where we stand at this time. That would just be our comment.
Very good point. So to that end, what I'm going to ask is that we take 30 seconds and Mark, your team revisits the fundamental reason why you didn't bring option 5 to us today, and then we'll give you back an explicit, not an implicit, but an explicit acceptance or agreement with that, or not, as the case may be. But so you're thinking with that intersection notion, I think, was that it was just not a good use of the land space available, was my overly general way of putting it. But what was your rationale? Can somebody give us that again?
It was also that in the February 13th discussion, as fidelity to teaming rose to the top of the criteria, and the fact that the teams were not all organized in a comfortable way, as Justin and Lori looked at the organization of teams at a grade level because they were split, that it introduced compromises to the fidelity that was essentially an Achilles heel to that option.
And when you presented that 2 hours ago, Lori had no objection to your sentiments about that. So, to my way of thinking, it makes number 5 a non-starter, and we can drop it out. Do we have people in agreement or not in agreement? Mark's looking for an expressed decision on our part, so they know with clarity whether that can get dropped out at this point or not.
I agree that 5 can get dropped out. I think educationally it doesn't support what Justin and Lori are trying to achieve with the teams.
Got it. And Charlie?
Yeah, I don't think we need it. I think we have a very rich palette here without option 5, and option 5 has that drawback. And I think Lori was explicit about that disqualifier.
I'm going to move to Chris.
I agree.
And Matt?
I support dropping 5.
Okay, so Mark, you've got it with, I think, the necessary clarity there, but I thank you for bringing us back to it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you all for taking that time. Again, Hill's intentions here is just to make sure, as you being our client, that you're comfortable in making these decisions. So I guess the next natural question would be, are we all on board with proceeding with a dwindling of one of these options for the feasibility study? I'm assuming this conversation will continue tomorrow, obviously, at the building committee meeting. But it'd be interesting to get this subcommittee's opinion on that strategy.
You're asking if we're dropping number 5 or dropping yet another one for feasibility work purposes?
I'm basically following up Matt's concern regarding how pricing will play a role in the evaluation of these options, right? I think right now the intent is to proceed into the feasibility estimating with potentially 3 options. And I'm just looking out for the best interest of you folks to say, why at this point would we eliminate any of these options? If we're comfortable with 4, let's price each one of these. I think there's information that could be gained and allow you folks to have a more informed decision on all options. So I guess that's really my overall point.
So let's convey that tomorrow, you and I, the fact that you're very comfortable proceeding with pricing because we don't have all the information necessary anyway for the work for 3 or 4. So given that, let's keep 4 in the game. Unless the discussion discussion tomorrow is so persuasive to the entire committee that there's some reason to drop another one to leave us with 3. But your recommendation is, in effect, no need yet.
Well, let me make a quick comment on that. There may be no need on the SMMA side or Hill side, but I think we ought to also think about our ability to focus, in a quality way on 4 different plans. If it's clear that something ought to be dropped, then we get to focus, tightly on things that are really feasible. Of course, if it's not, if it's not clear, then we shouldn't probably do it. But if it is, it's would be worth it for our purposes alone.
So I'm going to say, given that, Charlie, let's leave it with, given what we know now, there's 4 in the game, and we'll know whether that changes tomorrow or at another date.
Right.
Sounds good. I think maybe just to kind of alleviate ourselves of the goal, I guess, of coming down to 3 and allow the discussion to bring us to that point, to Charlie's point.
Good. I'm very comfortable with that. Let's just hear each other, everybody's opinions tomorrow, hear it clean, and after they've had time to reflect, and then we see what kind of aggregate opinion emerges, and then we see what the larger committee wants to do with it.
Appreciate that. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. So any other remarks before we wrap? We're at 3:30. We all anticipated this was going to be a stretch for 2 hours. I want to thank people for being as flexible and generous with their time. A huge thanks for the prep that went in for today. It looks like for the person casually driving by, this was easy work, but this was many, many, many hours of collaboration among you all to bring this to us today. So you've got our sincere thanks and appreciation.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Is there a move to adjourn?
So moved.
And Dawn moves to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
And Matt is our second. Those in favor?
Aye.
All right, so thank you very much. We brought the meeting to a close. Thank you to Chris for managing the meeting, for Keith for moderating the meeting, for everybody who brought information to us in a way that was so helpful. Take care, everybody. See you tomorrow morning.